Hey everybody, this is Alex Goff from Goff Rugby Report, welcoming you to the first ever Major League Rugby draft special, and we are joined by Doug Coil, a longtime journalist and expert on coverage of Major League Rugby, much more than me for sure. Also much more of an expert than me. Mike Tolkin, former USA National team head coach and former Rooney head coach. And Tim Brown, who's working with DCL Glory. And so we have voices from all over the game, from the college game, from the pro game, from the coaching side, from the talent evaluation side, to talk a little bit about the draft, all the pitfalls about the draft, and also who we think will go in what round. This will be we'll break it up a little bit, make it a little bit easy for you, but that's what we got. So, guys, before we get really jumping into it, Tim, I'll start with you. In fact, what are some of the things at the top of your mind in terms of this draft? Whether it's looking at concerns about it, or how excited you are about it, or anything to do with what teams are thinking.
Sure, Alex, and thanks for having me on the show. It definitely fulfills a need, and I will say my excitement has grown. Initially, I was probably like everyone else. I'm thinking, hey, I know who I want, and we're going to go out and negotiate, and I'd like to think I'm a better recruiter, and that Old Glory has a better setup, and that we're going to convince these players right out of college to come to us. We had a really nice draft last year, in that an informal draft, and that we got a couple Cal guys, Istro and Mirashem, that were top-notch, and we got a couple Penn State guys that were top-notch. So I think before the draft came out, we were thinking that, we're great guys. People are going to want to come to us. We had a nice first season. So it was, the owners had a plan for this, and I will say the owners, I do believe after going through this process that the owners know best, because I thought I knew college rugby. I mean, I had worked in it for years, and I scouted it hard. And some of the kids I tried to recruit to my college program are now coming around to be very nice pros. I did not know college rugby as well as I do now, because it caused everyone to raise their hand, to be organized, and to build a pretty reliable database of who's out there, their height, their weight, what they can do, an organized place to look at videos. So I get more excited every day, and I think it's done a lot to drive interest.
Now, Doug, I called you because I was looking at this draft thinking, hey, I know some of these college players, but I don't really know where the Major League Rugby teams stand in terms of what they need and stuff like that. So did you find what Tim said about college? Did you find like, hey, I learned an awful lot about deficiencies and stuff with the teams?
I looked at the MLR season, and I started to basically I wrote articles on every single MLR player. So I'm more aware of team needs and deficiencies there. The college game, because I've been devoting 3 years to the MLR, I wasn't as aware. So it's really I had to spend a lot of time looking at the draft list, some of your suggestions, trying to find video, which is very scarce. So I'm not as poised as some of you.
I don't know, but that's the thing is you were the guy you were the go-to guy for me. So that's why we had you in there. And Mike, how are you feeling about the draft overall, or the process and how it's going?
Well, it's an interesting exercise. Any amateur draft gives teams an opportunity to replenish their squads at an economical and supposedly fair method. But this is a little different. USA college rugby, as the two guys alluded to, the film can be scarce or, spotty. Teams play at different levels. So, you have the contextual aspect of it. And then for what we'd say, relatively speaking, is a small amount of money, you're asking kids to go all over the country. So it's a pretty big process for teams and doing their homework. But like the other guys, I knew MLR very well, and the players and the teams. In college, I had to do a bit of work, to find out who was out there. and it is a challenge. So teams
Yeah.
have their work cut out for them.
For sure. And now D1A is supposed to have video on every single game, and they're probably in the high 90s percentage-wise in terms of compliance on that. But quality level is all over the place. So if you're trying to track, and we're going to bring in some of the stuff from Rugby Analytics to help us with this. And I was talking with Derek at Rugby Analytics, and he mentioned something that all of you will nod your head at, which is some guy's listed as number 4, and then you're tracking him, and you realize he's been wearing number 5 the whole game. Anybody scouting, right, and or anybody trying to track a player, and you realize, you've marked this down, and this guy's a world beater, and it turned out it was somebody else entirely. So we're going on that. All right, so we're entering the draft. We've got teams that are looking and saying, okay, we've got 2 picks, two rounds probably, unless we did a trade, and there were some trades. What do you do? What are you looking for? Mike, I'll start with you, but what if are you looking for the best athlete? Are you looking for to fill a need? Are you looking for something else? I mean, is it all like personality? What should we be when we're filling out our draft card? What should we be looking for?
Well, I think if you go back to the teams, what has to happen is there has to be cohesion between the owner, the GM, and the coach. And they have to be in lockstep of how they want to proceed. Do they want to build a team, for the next 5 years? Do they want to win now? So their approach has to be in sync, and that's really important. Once they've come together with those terms and how they want to play it, then they would probably put together an assessment criteria benchmark. And this takes the metrics of the player and what he does in the game, and then it takes some of the intangibles like character, toughness, things like that. So they would rate each player. And then the last thing I would say, Alex, is that you have different draft philosophies. Are you drafting the best player out there? Are you filling a need? Or are you drafting to strength? Say your front row was really strong, and you say, you know what? The player we're going to draft is not going to help us immediately. But if we can build our strength through draft, and we can buy our weaknesses that we need immediately through free agents, overseas players, etc. All right. So I think you have one of 3 philosophies to follow, and all 3 of those people involved have to be on the same step.
Alex, ultimately it's up to our head coach, who really is the one who drives our personnel decisions. But it's been a mix. We know what we need, and I think our needs at Old Glory are very similar to a lot of the teams. Props, locks, and hookers are like unicorns, and you probably, they're just. I think it would be the same conversation if it was like Connacht talking to Munster. I mean, those positions are hard to find.
In my rating, I put if you're type 5, that was an additional point value just because you're a type 5 player.
There's no mystery in that, and I'd like to think I devour as much rugby media on how to evaluate players, but it's not really complicated what we need. I think a lot of it will come down to culture too. Our head coach it's been a learning experience for me over the last year. Our head coach and our GM did a fantastic job of building club culture. Coach Tolkin's been down there. In fact, I know Doug has been down there as well. So it's really how a guy works inside the system.
Character assessment that Mike mentioned is an important consideration. Noah Gold, Ryan Fitzgerald, and Nate Osborne developed a kind of a tool to assess a character that they could build team chemistry. And we see what's happening in the U.S. community right now, where sensitivity is critical. Cultural awareness is critical. Players that are brought in from other places need to assimilate in an area into a culture. Can they do that? Are they prepared? So that's also important consideration.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. He was very welcoming to me when we started in the league, and I actually talked to Ryan at New Orleans quite a bit about club culture, and I do think they're very cognizant of that, and that has been, not that it wasn't important to me already, but it's just been really helpful to hear his views on that. And actually had the New Orleans guys over to my house, and this is what we talked about.
It's huge. I've seen it in the college level where a kid comes from the West Coast, Hawaii, which is and ends up in these New England winters, and it's like, what's going on here? And they want to go home, and it's a difficult thing. And Mike, I don't know if you encountered that. New York, that's a unique culture, living and working in New York. So
yeah, it's a good point that you bring up there, because I think every coach today and every organization does their homework and has an assessment on character. In the pro level, everyone's got skill. Just about everyone's got skill, and then it's character and who you want to get there. But the other side of the coin is, what kind of infrastructure do you have to support those players coming in? Do you bring in the character? He's great character, and all of a sudden you drop him in the middle of nowhere with no help, no support system, and he's left there. So it's got to be a two-way street there, and I think most of the teams would do a good job there. And as you mentioned, in New York, there's a lot of unique things. Everything from going on the crazy bus to Randall's Island, to the harsh winters, and every place has a unique little footprint that you got to deal with.
Sorry.
Mike,
go ahead.
Mike actually touches on an important point. This is pro sports. They treat these guys like professionals. Our guys have the same medical team that, for instance, the Wizards and the Caps have. So, while they're in there they might be bumping up against the guy they saw on TV last night. So the medical care is top notch. The coaching is top notch, but they got to be willing to work. As Coach Tolkin brings up, it is pro sports, but it does have that hard edge to it, in that you got to be ready to be a grinder, and you got to look out for yourself, and you got to be willing to maybe this isn't the NBA or the NFL. It's definitely a workman-like situation. So coming from where we come from, where I was playing club rugby or Super League, I'm looking around going, man, isn't this the greatest thing I've ever seen? We have a clubhouse next to the field. We have new rugby balls. We have fresh, crisp pads, and they gave me a whole bunch of free kit. And but it's still not, it's still the guys got to work, and they gotta be willing to make sacrifices.
Well, Glory did a fantastic job in trying to assimilate players. Mickey Sassini Fengai, wife, young daughter, the team has gone out of their way, if the season had continued, to perhaps bring her over, and I think there's support among the international players as well within the team, and some of the players that are from other sections of the country.
I learned a lot from John Manson. Just little touches like the guys coming in and having a training table and having an organized place to take notes. They're treated very well in that aspect, but it's they still have, it's still a little bit of a, they got to work. League's growing.
What about living situations? It's not uncommon. It's pretty common in hockey with a lot of young players. Sometimes, playing NHL 18, 19, 20 years old, they're living with a family. Same happens in baseball as well, quite a bit. They're still learning to adult, as my son says. Are teams giving any thought to that kind of thing? Like finding a family for them to live with and have a.
You know what, Alex? It's it's an interesting time, because we have a pro league that's just starting in the midst of 4 major, highly successful, wealthy leagues. So we are pro league. MLR is a pro league, but in the face of everyone looks up the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball as a model of pro sports. So players tend to look at that. But in reality, we have to look at them as if we were a minor league baseball team. So when you talk about living with families, that's a great dynamic. It happens in minor league baseball, minor league hockey, and that's a dynamic to look at. I know most teams, and Tim would agree with this, there's a house bought or several houses or apartments and people stay in them and live on their own, etc. But it's not a bad dynamic that you talk about, and it already occurs in minor league sports of other teams.
So, yeah, I don't know. Anybody out there want maybe some free babysitting and get somebody to come and do some work around the house?
Save money for the clubs too.
I was pretty impressed with the way the guys were housed, and I've seen the opportunities that other clubs are doing, and I think everyone's worked out a situation where it reflects really well on the MLR that these guys are well taken care of.
All right, so I want Doug to start on this, but the other part of this about fitting in and everything like that is so some kids. Seems pretty clear that some of these these players who've declared for the draft have made it pretty clear, or it seems pretty clear that they want to live in one city and play for one team. And the whole point of the draft is you don't get to choose that, but maybe you kind of do. So, Doug, what are you hearing on that level?
I would think that given the salary range, 11.5 to 45, and for the college players, it's going to be on the low end. Do you have another job that you could go to that you're trying to do both? You live in an expensive area like LA, like New York. You have to have some other ways of supplementing things unless you're strictly doing rugby. Are you from a certain area that you're so used to that if you were to move, maybe it's not the wise thing. I really think we're going to see some trades after this first two rounds because of that reason. That teams will draft it and then something may be worked out.
You're supposed to do your due diligence here and should know, but you're not actually technically allowed to talk to the players, right? So, Tim,
I think that's one of the.
Yeah,
I think
go ahead, Mike.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think that's
good.
one of the dynamics of we look at other professional sports that are well established and their draft, and why can't you talk to a player beforehand, especially where we're dealing, with kids who have to move across country for small amounts of money? Wouldn't it make sense to be able to call player X and say, would you be willing to move here before we attempt to draft you and you may not come and we lose you and we lose our spot? So it seems to be nonsensical.
Tim, you having trouble with that, or what? Are we stepping into delicate waters here?
I would never talk to anyone.
Right.
I do have the advantage of knowing a lot of these guys. I attend as much college rugby as possible. So before the draft came out, I felt like I had a good knowledge of a good number of the players.
The other thing, Alex, is that, for years in club, like say during MLR, for example, not MLR, during Super Rugby, Super League, players would come from out of college in a totally amateur situation and go to Super League teams. Like we had guys when I was coaching at the athletic club, we had guys who came out of Berkeley, Andrew Lindsay. We had other players, Andrew King from California, Connor Coyne. They just came to NYAC to play and perhaps find jobs or just have a 1 or 2 year experience. And I'm sure that happened all over the country. And they would get no money, maybe a place to stay and a couple of dollars, but usually not. So it did happen in the amateur times.
Well, Coach Tolkin makes a good point there. After college, I went and played in Ireland, and what brought me back was the promise of a job here. And I very quickly jumped from that club because, quite frankly, Charlotte Rugby Club back in the day, they had a clubhouse. They still do. I felt like I was the richest guy in the world. I had a great job. I had a free place to live, and they let me bartend at a couple different places. So, I mean, I still think players will follow that dream. And the fact that they're getting a nice little stipend and a hot meal every day and excellent medical care, free kit, and world-class coaching, I think we've come a long way in a few years. So Coach Tolkin makes a good point.
There's another consideration that what local clubs are in the area. Are they playing for the ARP, Pacific clubs, Texas clubs that they can also get paid for? And since they're likely to receive, play very little time, they might be a reserve, it might be more of a practice player, they're going to need a club that they can attach to also and get high performance opportunities. Or Old Glory Capital Slow X, that type of play.
Yeah, here in the Austin area, that was a huge issue for the original Austin team because there were problems there. There was a schism there. So when then Todd Clever came back and tried to bridge that gap, and you do see players playing for the Huns and the Blacks, both excellent clubs, excellent amateur clubs, now getting time if they're not, with the MLR team. They're down playing with the club. So that got better. Things continually in flux, but that's interesting. So we're going to wrap this section up with just a quick look at actually who gets to choose what at what time. So here's a look at the round 1 and round 2, the draft sequence, and Doug, especially a couple of interesting things there because there've been a couple of trades. And what can you tell about that one? Especially, Nola trading with Los Angeles. That was kind of interesting to bump up to number 2.
What I understand about that trade is Nola shifted into 2. They sent their draft pick to basically LA in the second round for other considerations. Mm-hmm. What I hear in social media, there's other considerations, was an international player pick. So LA would have 11 players of international background, and Noah would have 9. The other trade was Utah taking both Houston's picks. So they have 4 picks, and they sent Robbie Povey, a Canadian international fullback / fly half, over to Houston. Houston gains with that a professional player that can immediately give them some impact at fullback. And with Brandon Sparks, director of rugby at Utah, they are going to build some U.S. college players.
No picks for Houston, four picks for Utah. But as you said, Houston gets a fullback / fly half. The value of that is there. Any other things you guys see in the sequence or some of those moves as we wrap up this section?
I think it states exactly what Doug said. Teams who are committed to build within, and there are several reasons for that. It's economic, number one, but also just as equal with that is it's building up a homegrown talent or a young player that fans really grasp onto, and continues with cohesion. You grow with the team and fans get to know you, and the system, and your teammates, and that's really important to growing a team.
It'll be interesting to see what Austin does. Austin went the route of bringing in a number of diverse internationals. They had a culture clash there. They had to go back and re-examine the team. And now the Austin Huns and the Blacks are in the mix. San Antonio's in the mix, and they're doing something with the women's program there in Austin as well.
Yeah. So that's our first section. We're going to get back. We're going to go for part 2. We're going to actually go into the picks and talk about that. And we'll be back with part 2 on the Major League Rugby Draft show.